Well, hello there again, friends. Today is 7/4/2022, and today is the Odin Project Vlog Day 128. Uh, like I just said, today is July 4th, so if you're here in the U.S., happy Independence Day. If you're outside of the U.S., happy day to you too. Happy day to everybody. So I am 43% complete with JavaScript, and today, on my holiday, I finished Asynchronous Code, and to say that I underestimated the size of this module is an understatement. There is a lot of content in here. No code, or there's stuff to read for code, but there's no actual building going on in this. Just a healthy discussion about asynchronous code, and mostly like 80% of it's about promises. Excuse me. Tourette's is active. And about 80% of it is on promises, and asynchronous code is by about 20%. But yeah, any of you that are following along in this, or have already done a portion of this, know what I'm talking about. There is just a ton of reading. So I'm not about to try to surmise this. I'm just going to create a video here, and I'm not going to use the word short, because every time I do it ends up being really long. But I am going to go over, there are a knowledge check points at the end. We'll just go over them briefly and call it good. But take your time with this. That's why I haven't put out a video in a hot minute. Well, one was because we celebrated the 4th yesterday with family, and I was traveling all day, so I didn't get really any study time in yesterday. And then today I was able to get some quiet time to get some study time in. And then I worked on this quite a bit on Friday night too. There's just a lot of reading. Not so much here, but in the assignments, like this isn't too bad. The videos, they have you watch some videos. I forgot about that. I actually spanned this over like 3 or 4 days, so I kind of forgot some of it. These videos are about 15 to 30 minutes long each, which is good. I actually really liked this one, the asynchronous code video that they link you to. Really puts it all together. But the thing that really not sets you back, but slows you down is chapter 2 callbacks and 3 promises. They're very good. Don't skip them. Don't not read them. But callbacks isn't too bad. But chapter 3 promises is insane. That's what I just finished today. And insane as in it's in depth. It's not super easy to understand. It flows well. They wrote the chapter well, but there's a lot to it. I think there's like 1,500 single lines of code. I think there's a lot to it. Don't rush through it. It's very important. At one point I got tempted to myself to stop and move on and just skip it when I was about halfway through. But no, I stopped. Like I tell you guys, stop. Took a break. Don't rush anything. Don't skip anything. I took a break. Came back. That was a couple days ago. Took a little itty bitty study time before we went off for family yesterday, and then finished it off today. So I actually did get through all of it. So additional resources as usual, and then we'll do the knowledge check here, and then I'll round it off. So what is a callback? So it links you out to the MDM article here, MDN, sorry, and callback function, as we're probably all aware, we've all been doing this for quite a while now. Callback function is a function passed into another function as an argument, which is then invoked inside the outer function to complete some kind of routine or action. A quick example, greeting name, alert, and then process user input, and then here would be your callback. So you have a function inside here, and then it does this thing, and then you're calling the callback with the parameter of name. And so the callback would be writing a function that does a callback inside of it to something else. And that's an example of a synchronous callback, and it gets executed immediately. We've done a lot of that, and pretty much all my code is riddled with that, which is in of itself isn't bad. It's a synchronous type process, meaning 1 happens, number 2 happens, number 3 happens, number 4 in that order, and it can't get out of order. And so we're challenged to think differently in this asynchronous code module. And so that's kind of why we're defining it. What is a promise? Essentially, a promise is an object that might produce a value at some point in the future. So, interesting enough, there's a ton of information about promises, and I'm not even going to pretend like I understand all of it. Probably like 60 to 70% of it I feel like I got a good handle on. But this is a meaty topic, and so I'll probably learn the rest of it by doing it in the code. But essentially, my first question I had was, well, that's an interesting name. Why do they call it a promise? So you'll learn in the documentation. I don't think it says in here, but it says in the one of the chapters. Because if they didn't define what a promise was as far as why they call it that, I was going to Google it because I was pretty curious. So promise is the idea of you have a variable that may or may not contain anything. It may be undefined, may have a value in it, but that it has a value at some future point, or it just gets aired out. It may sound weird to hear that, especially if I haven't went through the subject matter here. But basically, think of it as like the example I was given we're given is that you go to a bank and you go to get pre-approved for a mortgage, and the bank gives you a piece of paper that promises that to the buyer, if you're buying a house, for example, you show them that piece of paper. It says that this bank has promised to give you, say, $200,000 for this house if you decide you want to buy it. And that's kind of how promises work in JavaScript. So at some point, your code will look at a promise, and it's not guaranteeing it's going to have a value, but it's going to do a check, and then you have code logic built around it to call thens to do checks, and we'll talk about that in a moment, and check whether it needs to do something, whether it's a valid. What am I trying to think of here? Check whether it's a valid response or a valid entry, or whether it's invalid, like if there's an error with it, kind of like a try catch. Yeah, so I don't want to go too deep in that. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's essentially not the super 30,000 foot answer. When should you use promises over callbacks? So there's something called callback hell, and that's essentially when, and I got projects that are like this for sure, where you got this tree-looking, sorry if that's small, that's probably small to see on the screen, but you got this tree style inverted tree or whatever, nested. Basically, they're nested callback functions. You got a function here, console log, and then you've got a callback, here, and then you got a callback here, and then you got an else statement with a callback here. You just callback, 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 and it's asynchronous. It's trying to be asynchronous, but when you use callbacks, it's hard to get right intuitively, and a lot of code ends up looking like this, because it all is running synchronously, meaning if this then this, if this then this, if this then this, if this then this. There's no ability or no option for the code to go look at something else, or basically do an asynchronous action where there's something that may happen and may not happen in this order, but you may want to wait for something to happen, like a fetch from a site through an API or something like that. And this is nasty. This is hard to support. It's hard to troubleshoot. It's hard to have a teammate look at if you're working on a team. And so the idea is, answering the question, coming down full circle, is you can use promises to get around that and rewrite it. And the whole gist of, not the gist, but a lot of the gist of what we're reading in these modules is talking about that sort of concept, keeping your code shallow, like this, single scope functionality. As you can see, this is also not single scope responsibility, so it's not solid principles. They talk about that at one point. I don't think it's in this article, but here's how you fix it. Keep your code shallow. Modularize, like we just talked about, or kind of talked about. So like we've learned before, modulate your code and have one function do one thing, which is a solid principle. Handle every single error. So if you notice, there was no errors checking in the first example of callback hell. So here's an example of an error being thrown. So checking if there's an error, return the console.error. As an example, these are just crude examples, but ways that you can get around callback hell. Because one of the problems with callback hell too is if something fails in here, you can get the answer in dev tools in the console. But if you see here, there is no assumption of any error checking. There's no errors. There's no try catches. There's nothing. It's just basically a whole lot of for each loops and nested for each loops and nested functions and callbacks galore. So, and then rounding it all off, what does the .then function do? What does it do? So it ties in with a promise, and so what it is all promises instances get a then method which allows you to react with the promise. The first then method receives a callback and the result given to it by the resolve call. So for example, say you created in this example here using the key phrase new to create a new promise. So you create a new promise and it's a function. Oh, resolve is what I was trying to think of earlier. Sorry, my brain's rattled with all this new information. You have resolve or reject as your two most common arguments, if you will, that are inputted from a new promise. So you're gonna have a resolve or reject. So and then in here, inside the promise, we're setting a timeout with a function of resolve 10, and 3000 is milliseconds, so it's actually just 3 seconds. And then the .then takes the new promise. Once that set timeout gets set, it then checks the .then is the method it calls to check the result to see what it is. In this example, this is a mock-up async action using set timeout. So this result will be 10 because we gave it the resolve 10. Just for example, this gave it resolve 10 hard-coded into the set timeout. So it's always going to come out as 10 as a resolve because it's resolving it as 10, no rejection. So and this is not a complete example by any means because there's no rejection that you can do. You could do a reject then as well, and you can do a resolve then. This is just saying that you can use a .then to cancel out the result, which from the console gives you 10, and it's using a resolve. There's a lot more to it than that, but this is just a crude basic example. So then is just allows you to react with a promise. And another cool thing there's a lot of things you'll read about promises, but another cool thing about promises is that they're immutable, meaning that they can only hold one value and cannot be changed. So once this new promise is set with 10 right here in the set timeout function, it cannot change no matter what. Well, there is certain fringe circumstances, but pretty much no matter what, it can't change. Versus that kind of solves also the problem of callback hell, because callback hell you can get various errors and various non-errors that are producing results that may not be what you're looking for, but that's what it's doing in the code, and it makes it harder to troubleshoot. Using a promise philosophy and promise structure, it's easier to troubleshoot because you're guaranteed to get that number, and if you don't get it, you're going to get an error. So it's a lot more cut and dry. I'm not going to talk about it now because it's just too much, but there are downsides of using promises and it's kind of drawbacks and setbacks, so to speak. And they talk about that not in this article, but in the chapter 3 promises section that I was going through talking about before, where it's real meaty, real beefy. They go through a lot more examples, a lot more in depth on then and promises. So. And that's it. So again, I could talk forever on this as far as what I just learned, but I'm going to keep this one shorter. There's really no need to because you guys really should be going through this. So yeah. So thanks for coming along the journey with me. Hope you learned a little bit along the way and a little inspiration as well. Please like, share, and subscribe for more content. And let me know in the comments section how you guys are coming along with this module, this big module, and how your understanding is of asynchronous activity and callbacks and promises. So with all that said, till next time, see ya.